Hello everyone, this is Ayush Chatterjee. I'm currently a student of Medical College Kolkata. Today's topic is on hypertension and we are going to learn it in an integrated way. First I would cover the basic physiology of hypertension, then the pathophysiology of hypertension and finally the pharmacological aspect, that is the management of hypertension. So let's begin. The first question of our topic, what is hypertension? To simply state, hypertension is an increase in the blood pressure. Hypertension is nothing but an increase in blood pressure. This statement in itself has two parts. First, blood pressure. To understand blood pressure, I am going to take the help of a very simple diagram. Suppose this is a blood vessel and we have blood flowing through it, and this is the end of the blood column. When blood is flowing through a vessel, it will exert some force on the lateral walls of the vessel. This force is known as the lateral pressure, and also it will exert some pressure at the end of the blood column known as the end pressure. Now when the same blood vessel will supply any vital organ, for example the kidney, then the end pressure will be equivalent to the perfusion pressure. Now let us learn some terminologies related to blood pressure. The first one is the systolic blood pressure. The systolic blood pressure is the maximum pressure exerted by blood during systole. Similarly, the diastolic blood pressure is the minimum pressure exerted by blood during diastole. Now, pulse pressure can be defined as the difference between systemic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. Now, coming to the last of all, but not the least, the most important terminologies of this is mean arterial pressure. Mean arterial pressure can be written as systolic blood pressure plus twice diastolic blood pressure whole divided by 3. Now, why twice? We all know that during the cardiac cycle, the systole, it occupies approximately twice that of diastole. So, to compensate for that, we multiply the diastolic blood pressure by 2. Now, from the definition of pulse pressure, we can substitute the systolic blood pressure as pulse pressure plus diastolic blood pressure. The rest remaining the same. We get 1/3 of pulse pressure plus diastolic blood pressure. So this is the very well known and famous formula which we all remember, but the derivation is much more important. Now we have completed the first part of this statement, that is blood pressure. Now moving on to the second part, that is increase. Now to appreciate an increase in blood pressure, we should be familiar with the normal blood pressure. Now, normal blood pressure is systolic blood pressure less than 120 and diastolic blood pressure less than 80. Now, here the word "and" is very important because for a person to have normal blood pressure, both the systolic and diastolic blood pressure should be below this given range. Now, for pre-hypertension, systolic blood pressure should be within 120 to 139 and or diastolic blood pressure should be within 80 to 89. For stage 1 hypertension, the systolic blood pressure should be within 140 to 159 and or the diastolic blood pressure should be within 90 to 99. And for stage 2 hypertension, the systolic blood pressure should be greater than equal to 160 and or the diastolic blood pressure should be greater than equal to 100. Now coming to another type of hypertension, that is isolated systemic hypertension. This type of hypertension is more commonly in the elderly patients and is consistent with a condition known as arteriosclerosis. In arteriosclerosis, there are deposits of calcium in the tunica media of the blood vessel. As a result, the blood vessel will get stiff, the compliance decreases, there will be increased peripheral resistance, and the blood pressure will increase. In isolated systemic hypertension, we see that only the systolic blood pressure has a higher value, that is greater than 140, and the diastolic blood pressure is relatively low, less than 90. Now moving on to the types of hypertension. In the beginning, hypertension will have two main types, essential hypertension and secondary hypertension. Now what is essential hypertension? Essential hypertension means the primary abnormality or disease in the patient will be a rise in blood pressure, for which the cause is unknown. So it is also known as idiopathic hypertension. It affects 95% cases and the age group mostly affected is within 35 to 55 years. Now coming on to secondary hypertension, the primary disease is something else for which there will be a secondary or a compensatory increase in the blood pressure. So the cause is known for secondary hypertension. It affects approximately 5% of the population and the age groups mainly affected are less than 35 years and greater than 55 years, especially when they come for the first time. Now after knowing about secondary hypertension, let's move on to the important causes of secondary hypertension. So first and the most common cause is renal. And under that we have two main complications. One is renal failure and the other is unilateral renal artery stenosis. Coming to renal failure, our investigation of choice here will be first to perform kidney function test. This involves a series of tests such as serum creatinine, serum urea, uric acid, etc. Another test we would perform is ultrasonography. Here we will look at the kidney size. Interestingly, in hypertension, we would notice a bilateral shrinkage in the kidneys. Now moving on to unilateral renal artery stenosis. The causes for unilateral renal artery stenosis are mainly atherosclerosis in the old and fibromuscular dysplasia in young females. Now the investigation of choice here will be angiography. Now after the renal cause, we move on to some endocrine disorders which will result in secondary hypertension. So these are Conn syndrome, Cushing syndrome, pheochromocytoma, hyperparathyroidism, hyperthyroidism, acromegaly, and quite interestingly hypothyroidism. Why does in hypothyroidism the blood pressure will increase? The reason is quite simple. You see, in hypothyroidism, there will be a decrease in the thyroid hormone. Normally, we can all relate that there will be an increase in blood pressure in hypothyroidism due to increase in thyroid hormone. But what happens when the thyroid hormone decreases, the basal metabolic rate will decrease. As a result, there will be less energy production, less heat generation in our body. Such a condition, our body will not allow the extra heat to dissipate and it will result in peripheral vasoconstriction. So peripheral resistance will increase and as a result blood pressure will also increase. So in hypothyroidism also there will be hypertension mainly due to increased peripheral resistance. Now coming to the third cause, that is connective tissue disorders. There is a disease known as Takayasu syndrome which mainly affects the young females. If we measure the blood pressure, we will find that it is different in the two arms. Now there are some drugs which are related with hypertension. These are NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, oral contraceptive pills, steroids, and alcohol. So when a patient comes to you, the most important step is history of drug intake. If a doctor can successfully take this history and he finds that the patient is on any of these four drugs, then he easily correlate that the hypertension may be due to any of these drugs. Now moving on to the fifth cause, it is pregnancy. Now pregnancy has mainly two complications, preeclampsia and eclampsia. What is preeclampsia? It is a pregnancy-related complication where there will be an increase in blood pressure with damage to any other organ system. most commonly the kidneys. Now coming to eclampsia, eclampsia is a condition characterized by incidence of seizures or convulsions, and it mainly occurs in patients who have suffered from preeclampsia. Now last but not least, there are some other causes for secondary hypertension too. These are coarctation of aorta and porphyria. In coarctation of aorta, we will find videofemoral delay, and in porphyria, there will be dark colored urine. Now moving on to some clinical features of hypertension. Most of the patients will be asymptomatic, that is, he or she will not show any symptoms. That is why hypertension is also known as the silent killer. The other clinical features include headache, mainly in the occipital region during the morning hours, which is also known as morning occiput. Fatigue and palpitation are the other clinical features. There are some signs with which the patient will present to you. The presenting signs and symptoms include breathlessness, especially in patients of congestive heart failure, pain in chests in patients of coronary artery disease, renal failure, and vision problem. Now moving on to the management of hypertension. Management of hypertension mainly involves two steps: lifestyle management and drug therapy. Now what is lifestyle management? The doctor will advise the patient to make some changes in his or her lifestyle. These are weight loss. Diet changes mainly include restricted salt intake, increased fruits and vegetables, and decreased fat intake. Regular exercise, mainly aerobic, increased dietary fiber intake, tobacco cessation, and limited alcohol intake. Of these, the most important and the most effective type of lifestyle management is weight loss. Now coming to drug therapy, the pharmacological aspect, we all know blood pressure is equal to cardiac output into peripheral resistance, and cardiac output equal to stroke volume into heart rate. So from this we get blood pressure is equal to stroke volume into heart rate into peripheral resistance. So we can see that blood pressure depends on mainly these three parameters, that is stroke volume, heart rate, and peripheral resistance. So while treating a patient or prescribing a drug, these are the main three parameters which we would have to target: stroke volume, heart rate, and we have peripheral resistance. Now coming to stroke volume, there are some group of drugs. The first group of drugs which will reduce the stroke volume are the beta blockers. Now the beta blockers are drugs which have negative chronotropic and negative inotropic effect. As a result, they will reduce the cardiac output, as means they will also reduce the stroke volume. Now, apart from beta blockers, we have some other group of drugs known as the diuretics. The mechanism of action for diuretics is to decrease the blood volume. As a result, the venous return will decrease, the preload on the heart decreases. So the amount of blood which will be pumped by the heart, that is stroke volume, will also decrease. Now there are some conditions in which we can use diuretics. The uses are hypertension with congestive heart failure, and there also are some contraindications, conditions where we cannot use them, such as hyperuricemia, pheochromocytoma, and diabetes mellitus. Because a loop diuretic thiazide is a hyperglycemic, and so it is not recommended to give it to diabetic patients. The next group of drugs here are the nitrates. The nitrates mainly act by venodilation. Again, there will be pooling of blood in the veins due to venodilation, decreased venous return, decreased preload, decreased stroke volume. So there are three important group of drugs which will reduce the stroke volume: beta blockers, diuretics, and nitrates. Moving on to the next target, we have heart rate. We have to reduce the heart rate also. Now, again, the first group of drug here is beta blocker. As I have already mentioned, the beta blocker is a negative chronotropic agent, so it reduces the heart rate. The uses of beta blockers are mainly in angina, myocardial infarction, and a condition known as thyrotoxicosis, because one beta blocker, propranolol, it prevents the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3. Now there are some side effects or adverse reactions of these beta blockers. These are bronchospasm, erectile dysfunction. Now, decreased heart rate means bradycardia. I'm going to write it as BRAD, bradycardia. So our next drug will be ivabradine. So easy to remember. Ivabradine, it has the word brad right there. So it is also a drug which will decrease the heart rate. The only adverse reaction in case of this drug is glaring effect. So there are two groups of drugs which will reduce the heart rate: beta blocker and ivabradine. Now moving on to the last target, peripheral resistance. We all know that the seat of peripheral resistance is the arterioles, and peripheral resistance is proportional to 1 by r to the power 4, where r is the radius of these arterioles. Now here the first group of drugs will be the alpha blockers. Now the uses of alpha blockers are conditions like pheochromocytoma, elderly hypertensive, and in patients having benign hypertrophy of the prostate. Now, after this, we would move on to the next group of drugs, which are the calcium ion channel blockers. The calcium ion channel blockers have some adverse reactions. These are tachycardia and edema, especially in the feet. The calcium ion channel simply will block the calcium ions channel. There will be less entry of calcium ions, and so it will cause relaxation of the vascular endothelial muscles. The next group of drugs will be the ACE inhibitors, that is angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Now before moving on to the ACE inhibitors, let's take a look at a very important system, especially in the kidneys, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. We all are mostly familiar with this system. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, in response to blood pressure or often in renal failure, which we have seen is a cause for secondary hypertension, angiotensinogen will be converted, renin is secreted. So this renin will convert angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2 by the angiotensin converting enzyme. This angiotensin will then stimulate secretion of antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone. As a result, both of these will result in increase in blood pressure. So we do not want this to happen in a hypertensive patient. So we can treat this by inhibiting the renin synthesis. This can be done by a drug known as aliskiren. Again, see it has the letters I meaning inhibitor and REN that is renin. So aliskiren is the inhibitor of renin. Next, we can inhibit the angiotensin converting enzyme by angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Lastly, what we can do, we can block the receptor for angiotensin. This is known as angiotensin receptor 1 blocker. Now coming back to our discussion, EC inhibitors. Now EC inhibitors can be used in some conditions like young hypertensive patients, gout, and in unilateral renal artery stenosis. So these are the conditions where we can use angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. Now there are also some contraindications conditions where we cannot use them. These are pregnancy because it is a teratogen, and in congestive heart failure because it mainly results in hyperkalemia. Now if we can't use ACE inhibitors in pregnancy, there must be some drugs which we can use. These are the direct vasodilators. These are alpha methyl dopa, hydralazine. Along with them, there is also another drug known as labetalol, but it is not a direct vasodilator. It is an alpha beta blocker. It can also be used in pregnancy. Another drug is sodium nitroprusside. Sodium nitroprusside is a very useful drug because it causes dilation of both arteries and venules. That is, it will decrease both afterload and preload. Now, this in short was about the drug therapy of hypertension. Okay, now after knowing about the drug therapy, let's move on to comparative learning or study of two types of hypertension, white coat hypertension and resistant hypertension. Now, sorry, what is white coat hypertension? White coat hypertension means there will be increased blood pressure in hospital, but blood pressure is normal at home. And in resistant hypertension, there will be increased blood pressure at office, but normal blood pressure at home. So to measure such conditions, we use something known as 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure management. We send the patient home with a device which will measure the blood pressure throughout the entire 24-hour duration. The next day when the patient comes again, we will check the device, and from that we will be able to understand that whether the person actually has hypertension or not. Resistant hypertension can also occur in conditions like non-adherence to treatment, identifiable causes such as obesity, increased alcohol intake, and in all causes of secondary hypertension. Now moving on to another comparative study between hypertensive urgency and hypertensive emergency. At first, these two terms, urgency and emergency, may appear same, but these are not. Hypertensive urgency means there will be severe increase in blood pressure, but there will be no end organ damage. But in hypertensive emergency, there will be increase in blood pressure, but along with that, there also will be some end organ damage. So patients of hypertensive urgency do not need to be admitted in hospital. They can be easily treated on an OPD basis. But on the other hand, patients of hypertensive emergency have to be admitted in the hospital as soon as possible. Now moving on to the last topic, which are antihypertensive drugs used in emergency. So these are the three antihypertensive drugs: labetalol, sodium nitroprusside, and nitroglycerin, which we generally use in case of patients who come to the emergency wards. So friends, this was in short about the topic hypertension. We learnt about the basic physiology of hypertension, a bit about the pathophysiology, and finally the pharmacological aspect, that is the management of hypertension. So I hope I was able to make you understand this topic. This was a brief overview of hypertension. I tried to cover all the necessary points. So thank you for watching this video. I will be back soon with a new video. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. Thank you.